Do you still feel that way about not having any regrets?
No, there's definitely been some change.
Greg shares his side of the story on Nick Viall's podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to another shared news from home. Greg has spoken out and addressed all of Bachelor Nation's concerns, but before we get into what he had to say, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. As always, I'm your host, Fiona Zaring, and I'm joined by the wonderful Morgan Wright. Morgan, before we unpack this podcast episode, I've got to check in with you. How were you feeling about Greg once it was all said and done and we watched that 3-hour finale?
I mean, the 3-hour finale was a little much. I feel like I have whiplash from all the things that went down on this 3-hour finale. I will say that the most intriguing part of the whole episode was Greg's confrontation with Katie, which I think is kind of sad to Katie and Blake because it's like everyone is talking about this breakup with Greg and Katie, and not a lot of people are talking about the fact that they're happily engaged, or so they say. I will say I have a lot of different feelings about what went down with Katie and Greg, and I feel like every time I think about it more, I change my opinion because there's so many things to take into consideration, which is why I'm glad that we're really going to dive deep into this podcast because Greg really did take the time to sit down and address everything. And it has given me a different perspective than even 2 hours ago, 24 hours ago when I first watched it. My perspective of it is just continually changing.
Yeah, I am totally with you. I think from the first moment that breakup aired, I felt like Katie had some fault, Greg had some fault. They both made mistakes. And then the more and more we dive into it and continue to unpack it, try to understand each of their headspaces more, it just gets more and more interesting, to be honest with you, because I really do think this is going to be a breakup that Bachelor Nation continues to talk about for some time. All right, Morgan, let's start with Greg's acting because that was a rumor that kind of took hold on the internet in the early days of the season, but then it didn't really explode. We kind of all just let it lie, but Katie brought it up at After the Final Rose.
And seeing the way you treated me, using me to get the experience, the exposure, dare I say, the acting practice.
So now it feels like we really need to discuss this. It's suddenly become very important. Greg explained that he played basketball all his life and then he started working in life insurance. He didn't love the corporate world and he felt very stuck in that period of his life. Acting was something he was always curious about, so he applied to that prestigious acting school. Obviously, we have talked about the photos of him. That's sort of what sparked all of this, his attendance of this program. He said going to that school broke down many of his insecurities because he was a newcomer. He hadn't acted at all in his life before this. And a lot of the people at the school were very phenomenal. You know, this was their craft. This was going to be their careers. Then in his second year of attending the program, his dad got sick. He missed a lot of time because he helped his mom to take care of his dad. He really wanted to be there for his family, obviously, during this extremely difficult time. And so that really took over his life and honestly kind of derailed his time in the program. Greg said he has literally never been to an audition in his life. The depth of his acting is that he went to that school and then missed a lot of it, and that's that.
I missed a ton of time and I just didn't love it. Haven't been in an audition in my life. So like when this came out, I was like, yeah, whatever. I mean, I told Katie AFR, like I really wanted to reach out to her when this was all coming out, but I didn't want to step on Blake's toes at all.
Morgan, what are your thoughts on this? I have to say, way back when, I remember being like, okay, so he went to acting school, like he has 0 credits, like we don't know if there is any success here. Maybe he just didn't want to present himself as an actor because he doesn't really think he's one. I still kind of feel that way. How did this sit with you in the Nick Viall interview?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Whenever the rumors started to kind of come up online, you know, it was, oh, he took one acting class, or, oh, he wants to be an actor. We could never really get a straight answer. And that's where I'm always leery of these, you know, blind items that we see online. You can never take them at face value. So I'll say when I heard Greg say that it was a 2-year program, to me, that was more than I actually expected. I was like, oh, I thought it was only one class. Like that kind of is a little bit sketchy. But then actually, and I know we're going to continue to unpack his interview, when he talked about when he actually was supposed to be on The Bachelorette the first time, how many times he actually was supposed to be on it and didn't, and now he is. That made me think, okay, well, if he really truly wanted to be an actor, wanted to get his face out there, his name out there, he would have took the chance, he would have took the bait when he was, offered Becca Kufrin season, which I know we'll get into that, but that's way earlier than any of us were expecting to hear that he was supposed to be, on a season. I also am glad that Katie kind of clarified the whole point behind it is okay if you're an actor. It's not okay if you're acting with me, because the whole entire time I'm thinking to myself, do you want to bring up the fact that really Katie, when she went on Matt's season, was a podcast host, was a TikToker that had this very successful TikTok? Same realm, right? They're both in the entertainment industry. And I even went back to Matt James's bios of all the girls. Remember when they first come out? Because I wanted to see what her job title was. Is it a podcaster? Is it a TikToker? It was something in banking, but what I found interesting, one of her bullet points said that she would love to host a talk show someday. So I was like, what is the difference in someone have taking a year of acting class and someone doing a podcast, a TikTok, and wanting to host a talk show one day? So I will say that's where I'm glad that Katie really cleared that up. It's okay if you're an actor. It's okay if you want to be in the entertainment industry, if you're a podcast host, if you're a TikToker. It's not okay if you're putting on an act with me. And I genuinely don't think that Greg was putting on an act with Katie. I don't know. I will never know because I don't know Greg personally. I probably never will, but I didn't see an act.
Right. I didn't feel that way either. I think it's kind of obvious, like Thomas, right? That is someone to me who every interaction they had really did feel like he was putting on some sort of act, like there was some sort of level of polish there. And I know Greg made the joke. I don't think it sat very well with everyone on After the Final Rose that he's no Meryl Streep. But I kind of do get what he's saying, like to consistently portray a version of yourself over every interaction with someone over that many weeks and that many different scenarios that is a complete character would take a level of acting that I don't necessarily think with his short education he has the skills for either.
Right.
So that is the acting of it all. I really do think that there are going to be mixed opinions on if this should be a big deal, if he wasn't being authentic for some time. Bachelor Nation is very divided on this. And like you said, Morgan, we don't know Greg, so we're never going to get a super solid answer. I guess only time will tell. Does he get cast in the next sitcom? Does this really open up a new career for him? We will all just have to wait and see. Let's get into what you were touching on, his journey in Bachelor Nation, because how he ended up in Katie's season is not as direct route as we all thought. If you guys remember back, we thought he was initially supposed to be on Claire's season, but as Morgan mentioned, his sister actually nominated him for Becca's season. And at the time when he was reached out to by producers, Greg was like, I am too young for this. I am not ready to go on a show and tell someone I am going to marry them. Which, to your point, Morgan, again, is like, if he was just in this for fame and exposure, why wouldn't he have jumped then? They did circle back to him for Claire's season, which of course was later. Greg was older. He found out only a few days before he was supposed to go film that it was going to be Claire. And then, of course, he got there and everything shut down because of COVID. When they reached out to him and said, okay, we're ready to go. Do you want to come back and, try your chances with Claire? He said no, because he told producers he actually really didn't see a connection between the two of them. And having all of this time to come to terms with that, he just didn't think it would be the right environment for him to go back to. Producers really like Greg. They're going after him. They then, of course, reached out to him for Katie's season, and it happened to be the anniversary of his father's death. He made a game time decision, and at the last minute decided to get on the plane and go shoot a shot with Katie because of his interest in Katie, or so he says. Morgan, what are your thoughts? Nick seemed to be very impressed with this. He seemed to, I think, really give Greg credit for it. How does it sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, like we both have said, it kind of debunks the theory that Greg only wanted fame, because if he only wanted fame, he would have been on Becca's season. He would have been on Claire's season. But the fact that he turned it down twice for really solid reasons, the first time around he thought he was too young. He really wasn't ready to get engaged. The second time around, a little bit of back and forth, but at the end of the day, he didn't see it with Claire. Or to me, that says that you are there for the right reasons, that you are taking it seriously. And when he said that he got the phone call on the anniversary of his father's passing, if I was in that situation, put myself in his shoes, I would think of that as a sign, and maybe he
Hmm.
did. And he's like, this is what I'm supposed to do right now. It's Katie. I definitely see more so of a connection with her than I did with Becca and or Claire. And like, maybe this is my sign to go do it. So that definitely was shocking to learn that he was supposed to be on Becca's season, that he never even submitted himself. His sister submitted him. So I just feel like we have to be able to put the actor rumors to rest now, because like we have said, I mean, I've said it like 5 times now. If he wanted the notoriety, he would have jumped at it 4 years ago, and he didn't.
Yeah, I totally agree. It seems like he's also just like kind of in a transitional phase. Like he doesn't even know if acting is still going to be something he dives into and tries to pursue. It was a part of his life. He's been on a roller coaster since then. Only time will tell. And Morgan, it's interesting because as you mentioned, like obviously he could have taken that as a sign. I'm the same way. I probably would have taken it as a sign. And then he gets there, and on his first date with Katie, what do they bond over, right? The passing of
Yeah.
both of their fathers. It probably really all felt like this is where he was supposed to be. He was there for a reason. And then, of course, it did all blow up and things went wrong. So, as Nick and Greg did, let's get into the breakup with Katie, because that is where Bachelor Nation went from either you kind of like Greg or you like someone else better to very, very divided. Nick came in hot when they talked about the subject, and he said, how you went about it, you kind of looked like a dick. Greg agreed, and he said the first time he watched it, he was not watching it through Katie's eyes. He was watching it through his own heartbreak, his own experience. But the second time he watched it, he did try and see it through her lens. And he said, yeah, I looked like an ass and a child at times. I regret it because at the end of the day, she didn't deserve it. He added that he projected his own fears onto her, and he really did get that the second time around, that he was putting his emotions onto her.
But I saw how hurt she was, and so I really tried to watch it back the second time from her lens. And yeah, I mean, I was ashamed about how I reacted in those moments. She didn't deserve it, plain and simple.
As for that moment that seemingly changed everything, he said, yeah, on that couch, it was tough. I bared my soul in that moment, and I could just tell. He said that it doesn't always translate well on TV, but he could see something change in her eyes, and that his intuition was screaming at him in that moment. He explained, truthfully, it was just my intuition. I was obviously too harsh on her in those moments. It was just the way we were talking. I wasn't communicating well, and it's hard to pinpoint. I just felt like I couldn't read her in that moment, and we weren't on the same page. He also revealed that there was actually a day and a half between his hometown and their breakup. So there wasn't an exact moment that things went wrong, but the hometown really did upset him. He said he was in the fetal position in his room. He felt like he couldn't eat. He felt like he was losing his mind. He was just so eager to get on the same page with her. He also, and Morgan, this is something that I thought was really interesting. He didn't know that Michael A. had left. And in his eyes, there was a rose ceremony he was going to have to go to. And he felt like he just couldn't bear it. He could not go stand there and wait for a rose. And that is what prompted him to go have that discussion with Katie. And that's really interesting because as a viewer, I kind of just assumed that they all knew about Michael A., that the rose ceremony was irrelevant. That's how it was kind of, presented to us. He said he was completely rattled and shaken up because of how badly he wanted it to be real. He did say that the backlash has been very humbling and painful. He said people calling him an actor is easier to deal with than having to look himself in the mirror and realize the pain he's carried and projected onto others. So there is a lot to unpack there, Morgan. What are your general thoughts? How are you processing all of this?
Yeah, like you said, wow, it's a lot. I think my biggest takeaway from it is that you can never really take these things at face value or how they're presented to us. Because the fact that Greg did not know that Michael A was no longer in the running kind of does change a lot, right? Because in that moment, if Katie would say to Greg, you're here next week, him thinking that it's a final 3 and not a final 2, where it's just at that point him and Blake. That's like a significant change, you know what I mean? Like the final 2, that is endgame. That's like you guys are ready to propose. So I think the fact that he didn't know that it was a final 2 as opposed to a final 3 does make it a little bit different. And the moments that we didn't get to see, we didn't get to see him in the fetal position in his room, not being able to eat. We could see that he was rattled and not in a good place. We didn't see that there was a day and a half in between their hometown and when he actually went over there. So I just think that sometimes the editing process leaves out too much context and it forces Bachelor Nation into these wars on Team Greg, Team Katie, when if you really had all of the information, you would see that it's not as black and white as being able to pick a Team Greg or a Team Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. And he kept talking about how he just really, wanted it to be real and it was really important to him that they are on the same page and all of these things. And I think that I mean, he says it himself. It wasn't the right environment. Like, he knew what he was signing up for. He didn't know how hard it would be for him. And it seems like at the end here, it was just not something that he was in a place to process, to go through. He shared some details of a moment that we didn't see between them. He told the story of them actually having their mics off after their second date. And at that time, in that totally private moment, he took the opportunity to tell her that he was completely really falling in love with her, and that in that moment she didn't say it back to him, and that's sort of what sparked these fears that he just wasn't going to be her guy. He said that he's been doing a lot of reflecting and that their relationship definitely wasn't the healthiest kind of love. He mentioned, the bonding and connecting over their dads, all of the drama that transpired. He said he relied on her too much for his happiness, and he wants to get to a place in his life where he's more whole and doesn't expect another to make him happy. So definitely some real self-reflection there. And I think that those are very humble, real emotions that he's trying to process. I kind of wish that some of what he said here, he would have said to her on After the Final Rose, right? Because copping to the fact that he was in a place where he was leaning on her too much for his happiness, he would have said that when Tayshia and Caitlyn asked if he had any regrets. Like, completely different conversation in my eyes. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and it honestly very well could be that he did say those things. They were just cut on the editing room floor. I mean, you truly never know, because he does get into that a little bit too about how some things were left out of After the Final Rose. And that's why I feel like sometimes the editing process just doesn't really do it justice. And it makes us choose these sides when there's so much more to the story. I will say, for him to be able to have this type of self-awareness and, like you said, self-reflection, it really does look like he took a lot of time to really look deep inside himself and figure out what was it that really sparked this. I mean, I know I've said this before. I always try to put myself in the person's shoes to understand really where they're coming from. And I think with Greg having all these doubts, it would be really, really difficult to sit in a hotel, wait for producers to come and get you. Meanwhile, your head is going a million miles an hour. I have to propose to this woman in a week. I have to meet her family in 3 days. And I don't even know if she loves me. That would be a really hard thing to have to go through for anybody. I feel like, honestly, getting engaged under regular circumstances is pretty scary. I feel like, people have those fears. And under these circumstances, it just is not a normal situation to put yourself through. And I can see why some people would snap under that type of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. I've said it so many times, but I could never survive in the environments of these shows. I think I have a lot of compassion for the people that try to go through it, because I know I could not. Of course, in addition to the breakup, there was the After the Final Rose fight. So they kind of dove into the breakup and the fight separately. Greg said, overall, it was a painful, humbling, and scary experience. He feels like he can do better, and it sucks how he reacted. And he said that it sucks that he triggered so many people. So he's really taking to heart the fact that a lot of people watching at home, based on their own life experience, had a really hard time watching these interactions between him and Katie. Nick asked how long they actually hashed it out on the stage. And I think this would have been really interesting if we could have got a more concrete answer here. Greg says he doesn't know because he completely blacked out up there. But obviously we didn't see 40 minutes worth of arguing, right? So if we could have gotten a little bit more of a timeline there, I think maybe it would shed some light on how much they cut. For instance, he said that he did address the whole acting story, right? The timeline of when he went to school, how big of a part of his life it actually is, and that did not make the cut. They chopped that right out. Greg addressed, listen, a lot of people, our very own Zachary keeps calling him a wimp, right? He seemed very quiet, very shut down up there. He didn't really fight back. He said he was scared out of his mind, both on After the Final Rose and on the show since it first started. Said everyone has layers to him, but in terms of how he was feeling, how he was portraying himself through this process, he was generally pretty scared and nervous. He did hope that things would be better at After the Final Rose, but understands why Katie feels the way she does. So I was hoping for a little bit more of what his defense to some of her accusations would be. He kept it a little more vague. But what are your thoughts on what he had to say?
Well, for what he had to say After the Final Rose, it really wasn't much. And, in the moment, we're all watching him and we're like, Greg, say something. But, if he was truly scared out of his mind, it's like the fight or flight reaction, I don't really want to go through this. There's cameras, there's a live audience. It just is such an unnatural thing to have to go through. And then your ex be really, really angry with you. It just is so unnatural. I can understand how in that moment you might freeze. I do, give him props for saying that he understands how she feels. He hasn't dragged Katie through this. I mean, I know they had a big fight. I know that that's what everybody is talking about, but he's not talking about her more now, saying, doubling down, saying that she was wrong and he was right. And this is how I felt. He's kind of looking at things as in a whole now, which I feel like you do when you're a little bit further removed from the situation. And he said a lot of times that Blake was a really great guy. So I feel like at the end of the day, Greg is ready to move on. Katie is ready to move on. We should let them move on. And I feel like, Greg shouldn't always have to answer questions about Katie moving forward. And Katie shouldn't always have to answer questions about Greg. Like, from here on out, let's hope that it's more about Katie and Blake than Katie and Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if there's any question, I think, to how real it was for Greg in those moments, he revealed that when he went home, he kept calling producers desperate for answers. And he even told his mom that there wasn't a 0% chance that he and Katie could find their way back to each other, just knowing how real all of those feelings were for him. So I feel like obviously that is put behind him, right? Like you said, he is very happy for Katie and Blake. He clearly thinks very highly of Blake, which we'll get into in a second. But I think that this was someone who threw themselves into an environment that they didn't quite understand, weren't quite ready for, felt a lot of things, didn't process it all correctly, and is now just trying to heal and move on. So we should give him the ability to do so. Let's get into what he had to say about Blake, because we've talked about bromances and the guy friendships literally all season. And even now, right, even as Greg is coming so under attack, he did not have a single poor thing to say about Blake. He said, watching it back, the relationship with Blake, he was so happy that Katie seemed truly happy throughout the show and was able to express her love with Blake because, in his opinion, it actually seemed more natural. Like, he saw a connection between them and understood why they are together today. He said, Blake is an incredible guy, and I know they will be happy. I was so pleased that this is the route he took here, because I think it kind of, I liked Greg throughout the season, right? It's giving me the ability to feel like, okay, I still think he's kind of a good guy, He made some mistakes. But this is taking the high road to me. This is being very, very, I don't know, humble. He's out of the game and he's happy for the guy that won. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he mentions how he watched it back and did see the connection between Katie and Blake. And I feel like, throughout the season, he's in his own little world, where he's just focused on him and Katie, but he does get those glimpses of doubt, like we mentioned before, after the second date where he said that's when things first started to feel off. When he saw Blake and Katie on their one-on-one and he was like, "Oh gosh, like that feels off." And then for that blow up to happen, when she says, "I like looking at you," like, just not the best thing to say. And I feel like after all of those things happen, you can actually kind of take a step back and realize, okay, like maybe this is what was meant to happen. I know we kind of took a messy road to get here, but at the end of the day, like this is what's right for her. Eventually, this is going to be what's right for me. And hopefully, all parties can move on happier and in healthier relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we talked about this in our finale recap. Katie wouldn't break the rules, right? Greg was basically saying to her, if it's me, it's me. Why do we need to do fantasy suites? Why do we need to keep going? Like, if this is real, it's real. She couldn't break those rules she set for him. We saw her pretty much without hesitation break the rules for Blake in that finale. So I do think everyone ended up where they're supposed to be, right? I mean, Katie clearly was able to get there with Blake and not Greg. So at the end of the day, no matter how messy the road was to get here, it seems like it all ended up where it should have. In this interview with Nick, Greg very passionately endorsed Andrew S. and Michael A. for potential Bachelor roles next season. Morgan, do you think we'll ever really see Greg a part of this franchise again? Like, is he going to be a guy that's willing to throw himself into paradise or try to weasel his way onto someone else's season? Or, clearly he's not thinking next season, but further down the line, come back as the Bachelor? Or was this it? Was this just too much for him? He's had his piece. He's done with it.
I genuinely do not think we will see Greg on any Bachelor spinoff. I don't think we'll see him in Bachelor in Paradise. I definitely don't think he'll be a Bachelor anytime soon. I think that this maybe was a little too much for him. And there are some contestants, let's be honest, that don't really need it. I don't think Greg really needs it. Tyler Cameron didn't need it. I'm not saying that he's going to be the next Tyler Cameron, but I even feel like Justin doesn't need it. You know what I mean? Like they will have opportunities outside of the Bachelor world. And obviously this wasn't the best fit for him. So I don't think so. I mean, do you?
No, I'm so glad you're saying that because I feel that way too. I think that he is someone that divided Bachelor Nation in a way that the people who stan Greg, like fully 100% team Greg, they're not going anywhere, right? And people like me who landed somewhere in the middle, I'm curious enough to kind of keeping up with him, see where his journey takes him. But I don't really expect to see him like wandering onto the beach in paradise anytime soon. Because he, at the end of this, was miserable. And it just doesn't sound like he would be ready to throw himself back. I think Greg is going to be someone that hopefully just takes some time for himself for a while, lets himself heal, and, hopefully eventually finds love, right? Who knows? You guys, that is everything we have to share with you from this very lengthy interview with Nick Viall. Go listen to it if you haven't already. We want to know all of your thoughts. Did this change your opinion about Greg at all? Let us know down in the comments. And if you are not already subscribed to our channel, make sure you do. Make sure you ring the bell so you don't miss out on any future Bachelor Nation updates. As always, I'm your host, Fiona Zaring, joined by the incredible Morgan Wright. If you want to come say hi, be sure to check out our socials. They are on the screen right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.